The Chinese economy is growing at 6% per year, which is something that the Western economies can only dream about. Irrespective, you see the media, you see all over YouTube that the Chinese economy is collapsing. Is that really the reality? Are we being shown both sides of the argument? In today's video, we speak about China and we speak about the challenges that the economy is facing, but also all the steps that it's taking to counteract those challenges. And we end with whether we see a safe path or a safe landing for the economy. Welcome back to another episode of Peak Pursuits with Meher and Jazz. Let's get into this episode. So, let's present both sides of the argument, starting with the challenges that the economy is facing. The number one challenge is debt. Undoubtedly, the Chinese economy is one of the most leveraged economies in the world. If you see a comparative analysis of the debt to GDP of the Chinese economy with the Western world, you see immediately that the economy is quite highly leveraged. Now, there are several underlying reasons why this is. Number one, the Chinese economy is an investment-driven economy. We know the fact that China is a manufacturing-led economy. It is really the world's factory. The government and the corporate sector has spent and invested a lot of money into building its capacity all over the world. The number one challenge is debt. But what are the underlying reasons for this? The reasons are driven by the fact that the Chinese economy is an investment-led economy. We know the fact that a lot of infrastructure which is built in the Chinese economy is supported by debt. The manufacturing capacity of the country is supported by debt. And of course, the real estate sector, which is a mainstay of the economy, is supported by debt. So it is a double-edged sword for China. On the one hand, it's allowed the country and the economy to achieve a tremendous amount of growth and prosperity, but on the other hand, it's led to a massive balloon of debt, which the entire world is worried about. The reality is that the Chinese economy has gone through a tremendous period of growth and transformation. Right from 1980, when the government undertook this massive program of transformation of the economy and liberalized the economy, hundreds of millions of people have come out of poverty. And as you can see, the GDP per capita of the country has also gone all the way up to being very competitive against the Western economies. So a lot of good has happened. But in this video, we explore what is really the reality of the economy. Now let's talk about problem number two, which is real estate. Now, real estate is a very significant proportion of the Chinese economy at nearly 30%, which is higher than the US economy and other Western economies. Now, there are several reasons for this. Number one is, of course, the cultural value associated with real estate, which is more pronounced in China. But the other more acute problem in China is the fact that financial assets, which tend to be quite liquid and readily tradable in the Western world, is not really as trusted in China. And so really, real estate has always historically been that one asset that every family buys. The problem is further compounded by the fact that there has been a rapid urbanization in the country. Several people have moved from villages into cities as the country has gone through its period of tremendous growth. There have been much more opportunities in the cities. And really what it's led to is massive construction and building in the Chinese economy. You would have seen stories of many ghost cities where a ton of buildings and residential blocks have been built, which are largely unpopulated. This is because a lot of the companies that have been focused in this sector have built these assets on the basis of pre-sales. So in a lot of cases, they have sold the asset before it's actually built, and they have borrowed money against it, which has really allowed to expedite the growth and construction activity in the country. But you can clearly see that this is a very unsustainable strategy, because when the pre-sales stop and when people become more wary to buy these assets, then the debt which these companies have undertaken can no longer be serviced, which is something that companies like Country Garden and Evergrande have been facing, where they have a huge amount of debt which can no longer be serviced. Number three is demographics, which is an issue specific to China, which most people will understand. China implemented the one-child policy back in 1979, when the population of the country was expanding massively. The government was concerned about the lack of resources for the growing population, and as such, they implemented a one-child policy. Cut to 2024, we see that the overall birth rate in China has declined to almost 1.15, which is much lower in comparison to the Western economies. And really, it's only been a downward trajectory right from 1980. Now, what are the problems caused by this? The key problem is that the manufacturing powerhouse of China is supported by its growing population. The reason why China was able to produce so much goods in the economy and had this manufacturing boom was driven by the huge population and by its cheap labor force. Now that the population is aging, people have made much more money. The average income of the person in China has increased massively. People are no longer willing to work or less willing to work in the factories, and the overall percentage of the population which will have the capacity to work in manufacturing jobs will decline. What does this mean? What this means is that it leaves China with a problem. How do you replace the domestic product coming from manufacturing? And what do you do with this aging population? How will this growing population be able to provide itself the resources that it needs to sustain themselves all the way up to retirement? As you can imagine, this has massive implications for the pension system of the country. The next thing to note here is the decoupling from the West. Right from Trump's election in 2016, there has been a one-way trend where the Western economies are increasingly trying to decouple themselves from China. It all started from Trump imposing tariffs on the import of Chinese goods. In retaliation, the Chinese government also imposed similar tariffs, but really the onset of COVID further exacerbated the problem. And where we are today is that the collective West is clearly trying its best to move its supply chains away from China. Apple, for instance, have been trying to diversify its manufacturing base away from China and move to countries like Vietnam and India. Other companies are really following suit, and we are seeing a trend where a lot of manufacturing is shifting away from China. This has a massive problem in the long run because, once again, the population of the country as of today is dependent on manufacturing. Manufacturing has been the mainstay of the economy. So if we have decoupling, it has massive ramifications for the population. Now, the next problem is deflation, which is something that China has started facing. What does deflation mean? Deflation means that the cost of goods and services is declining over time in the country. Now, what is really causing the deflation? The hint of why deflation is becoming a bigger problem in the Chinese economy is already explained by some of the points that we've discussed. The decoupling of the West from China, the huge real estate boom, the huge debt problem has all caused this problem. Now, why is that? Number one, if the overall manufacturing capacity is moving away from China, and if other countries are building their own manufacturing hubs, then the demand for goods and services produced in China is declining. Secondly, when you talk about the Chinese consumer, you see that because of the problem of the real estate issue in the country, because of the huge amount of debt burden in the country, the average corporate and the average household has a high proportion of debt. And this makes people much more nervous at the moment to spend money. And you can see this clearly based on the trends. Now, why is this a problem? It is a problem because, generally speaking, deflation is associated with an underlying nervousness about the strength of the economy. The consumer is concerned about the strength of the economy. And what do consumers do when they're nervous about the strength of the economy? They don't spend. And this is exactly what the Chinese economy is facing. The consumer is not spending that much money, which is exactly what the government wants it to do. Secondly, if you think about the amount of massive debt to GDP of the Chinese economy, inflation is really the way in which you can inflate away the value of your debt, right? Because if you keep making more money and the value of your goods and services keeps becoming more expensive because of inflation, the real value of your debt declines over time. However, if it's deflation, then it's the opposite problem. The real value of the debt is inflating over time. And also, if you think about the corporate profitability, As the manufacturers are seeing the prices of their goods and services decline over time, their profit margins are squeezed, which in turn causes them further problems where they can't service their debt. So as you can see, it is a massive problem. So now we've covered all the major challenges which are prevalent in the Chinese economy. However, now we will steelman the other side of the argument. What really are the fundamental underpinnings of the strength of the Chinese economy? And why do we think how it will be able to transition into a more sustainable growth trajectory? So here we talk about three major things. Number one is the fact that the Chinese population and the Chinese economy is moving away from being a manufacturing-led economy into a service-led economy. This is the rite of path for every major economy. The main challenge for the Chinese government is the fact that the Chinese economy, as we have already discussed, is heavily reliant on manufacturing, which on the one hand has led to its massive growth. A lot of population has come out of poverty, but on the other hand, it always makes the economy more driven and more susceptible to external vulnerabilities and to what's happening in the external world. And there are diminishing returns of an investment-led strategy. The goal of the government is to transform the population from a manufacturing-led into a consumer-led economy. And what does that do? It allows China to be much more inward focused. It no longer needs to make money from the external world. It can rely on its own population spending money on the goods and services produced in the country, which makes it a lot more resilient to external factors. The second is a trend which is also very clearly visible. The Chinese manufacturing is moving from low-value products to high-value products. Now, what are these high-value products? These are industries such as semiconductors, electric vehicles, the overall upcoming AI generation, renewable energy. What we are effectively seeing is that the Chinese manufacturing capacity is moving up from low value to high value products. The main challenge in order to achieve this is a continuous amount of investment in education, skills development, research, and what we clearly see is that the Chinese government is spending more and more money to develop the country's capacity to manufacture these high value products. And this can be seen by the fact that nearly 1.5 million patents were filed by Chinese companies in 2020, much higher than any Western economy. And what this effectively means is that China will be competing with the US, Germany, and with the collective West in terms of manufacturing goods and products which are high value, which is where the entire game will be won in the coming decades. The next is the internationalization of the yuan, which is something that has been in the news recently, but it is a trend which cannot be denied. Several studies are clearly showing that the proportion of international trade in yuan has been consistently rising over time, and the proportion of trade happening in US dollars is declining over time. Now, what are the reasons for this? There are several reasons. First of all, there's a push from the Chinese government itself towards pushing its partners to trade in yuan. When it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative and when it comes to the BRICS collective organization, you can see that China is pushing the countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative and also the BRICS countries to trade within each other increasingly in yuan. And the evidence suggests that it is increasingly successful in conveying and convincing these countries to do so. What does this exactly do? It again provides China much more resilience to external shocks. One of the main reasons why the US economy is so robust is the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. If China can take a substantial portion of goods and services being traded in yuan, it could reduce the dependency of the country on the US dollar and increasingly make it much more resilient to external factors. With that, guys, we've come to the end of the video. I hope this video was useful. What we wanted to achieve through this video is to provide a balanced perspective of what really is happening with the Chinese economy. There are clearly challenges, which we outlined at the beginning of the video. However, there are several steps which the government is taking in order to ensure that the economy has a sustainable growth trajectory for the next several decades. Will it be all smooth sailing? No. But should we count out the Chinese economy already? We don't think so. It remains to be seen, but as we learn more about the upcoming developments, we'll keep you posted. And once again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.